Hello, everyone. Welcome to our genealogy jumpstart session for today. Today, we are talking all about military records from World War I to more current wars. For those who don't know me, I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian here at the library and also kind of the resident genealogist. So, although I'm not an expert in military records, I'm going to do my best and we'll see what kind of resources there are through the library that you can use to research those veterans in your family tree. If you missed our session 2 weeks ago, that was kind of everything before World War I, just kind of a refresher. We can't cover everything. I mean, if we sat here and talked about every single major US involved war and all the resources for all those veterans, we would be here all day. So it's kind of just a brief overview of some of the things that you might be able to discover about those veterans. I have some handouts for you. The virtual folks, I posted a link in the chat. There's a couple other resources in your handout that you can use to explore a little bit more on your own and see what else, depending on what veterans you have in your tree. If you're looking for that pre-World War I talk that I did 2 weeks ago, you can find it on our YouTube channel. And I've also have the handout from 2 weeks ago on our Genealogy Jumpstart webpage. So if you need help navigating to that later, I can show you that later. Another kind of refresher from last time is the availability of the different records is going to vary greatly from war to war and the various branches of service. So of course, the more recent documents related to veterans are going to be not as accessible as those from World War I and prior because not enough time has passed. So, if you're looking at your Vietnam veteran, you're not going to get as much information compared to that Revolutionary War veteran or that Civil War veteran. I always recommend starting with the Family Search Wiki, which is a resource that's completely free, and start searching by the war or by location that you are searching for. So you can put in Wisconsin Civil War in the Family Search Wiki, and it will give you a nice little history kind of brush up. It'll give you links to some of the main online resources for that war and that location. And it's also a really great starting point for international military records because we're really only focusing on US military records at this point. And kind of another refresher from last time, kind of the four major things that you need to do with military genealogy is first you need to confirm their service, so make sure that they actually served. Then you need to identify their service details if you haven't already. So, seeing, what unit they served in or what regiment they served in, what branch of service they were a part of, what time period did they serve in. If you don't have those details, I would encourage you to check some of your existing research for different clues. And I went a little bit more in depth in that the last time. So if you didn't catch that talk, feel free to watch the recording and learn a little bit about the existing things that you can look at to see if they did serve. I also have this handy dandy little kind of cheat sheet that kind of gives you the different birth years for potential veterans, as well as the battle years. So if you're, for example, looking at World War I, if you have an ancestor that was born between 1872 and 1900, they possibly could have served in World War I. So you'd go forth and try to see if you can find any information about their service and if they did in fact serve. And of course, then, if you still need additional clues or additional information to really drill down to what unit they served in, what branch they served in, all that stuff, you can do some additional searching with some of the genealogy tools that I'm going to show you today as well. So now we're dive into the major record types already. So we talked a little bit about draft records last time when we talked about the Civil War. Of course, there was something called the Selective Service Acts that came out in 1917, 1940, 1948, and 1967. The great news is that you can order some records through the National Personnel Records Center for a fee. So I have this link in your handout, but I just wanted to show you that this is where you would go to learn a little bit more about how to access these records. So none of them are online. So it kind of talks you through depending on what time period you're looking at. And then there's a selective service request form, and it talks about the different fees. It's not too bad for getting those if you'd like a copy of those of your ancestor. I did want to let you know, though, the World War I thing that you would access through the Selective Service is just their draft card, which you can get freely online, and I'm going to show you in a minute how to do that. So I would encourage you, if you have other veterans that would have applied for Selective Service, to do the ones that are post World War One and do the World War One ones with the free draft card that you can find online. The World War II through Vietnam era, these are kind of the dates that are covered in those records. So 1877 to 1957, roughly, except for there was a brief time period between 1957 and 1959 where men weren't required to register with Selective Service. They briefly suspended it, but then they reinstated it again for men born from 1960 to later. So kind of look at those dates before you decide, oh, should I order this? And go forward with that to make sure that they're actually covered in here and that you're not wasting your money. So with draft records, you can locate World War I and World War II draft records on Ancestry. So there's either the paid edition that you would have a subscription to, or we have the free library edition that you can use within the library. We also have Fold 3 library edition that you can use here in the library, or if you have an Appleton library card, you can use it from home as well. And then Family Search is a completely free site that I'll show you how to use later. I'll show you how to use all three of those later, but you can use them to look at the draft cards. So for World War I, in 1917 and 1918, approximately 24 million men that were in the United States completed a draft registration card. And remember, just because they completed this card does not mean they served. It just means that they were eligible to be drafted. And it covers approximately 98% of men that were born or that were in the US and that were born between 1872 and 1900. So a good chance that you'll find quite a few male ancestors in these World War I draft records. There were 3 different registrations for World War I, so the cards are going to look slightly different, and I'll show you examples of all 3 of them in just a second. But the first registration happened on June 5th of 1917, and it only covered men that were aged 21 to 31. So I've got the dates there for you to figure out when your ancestor's birth date was, if they were included in that or not. Then a year later, they did another draft for all the men who had turned 21 since the first registration. So again, I've got those dates there for you that their birth date would be. And then any men who had not previously registered and were not already in the military also registered during that second registration. A couple months later, they did another mini kind of supplemental draft for the additional men who turned 21 since the June date. And then the third and final registration for World War I happened in September of 1918, where they expanded it a little bit. It was men aged 18 to 21 and 31 to 45, so a lot bigger of a span. So if your ancestor was kind of on the tail end of any of those, they probably likely registered during that third one. So here's an example of them and how you can tell which time they registered in. So you see the registration date right over here, and I'm going to zoom in on this so we can look at it a little closer and see what details we've got. So this is through Ancestry Library Edition. So kind of the first part of the card, we of course get some biographical kind of information, their name, their age, address, date of birth, if they were a natural born citizen, if they were naturalized, if they were considered an alien, which is somebody who's foreign born and not a US citizen or not a naturalized citizen. Where they were born, which is really helpful. Now you have a date and a location to try to follow up and get a birth record for them. If they have any occupation at this time, who they're employed by and where they're employed. Kind of their dependent status, if they have people that are dependent on them, their marital status, race, any previous military service. If they consider themselves exempt from draft, they can also write that in there, like maybe they have some sort of disability that, makes them kind of exempt. So they can write that in there. The other cool thing is you've got their signature right there. So that's a really neat way to see your ancestors' handwriting. And then on kind of the second half, we get a little bit more of a physical description of that person. So you can see kind of how tall or short they were, eye color, hair color, all that kind of stuff, if they have any distinctive marks or anything like that. And then down here, this is where you would see that date to determine, okay, it's the first draft registration or the second draft. Not that that really matters, but just so you're aware that they all look a little different. Then the second one is going to look just slightly different. We're still going to get the same kind of information. So again, name, age, address, date of birth, where they're born, occupation. This also asks for the father's birthplace. So if they registered with the second one, you get that little tidbit of information, even though this one just basically says Germany, so not a more precise location than that. You get a name of a nearest relative, which is also really neat. So that might be a brother, it might be a spouse, it might be a parent. Again, you got their signature over here. And then that back part of it is, again, that physical description that you've got. And then you can see the date. This coincides with that second registration date. And then that third one, again, looks slightly different, but a lot of the same information here. So we've got their name, address, age, birth date, information on their race, citizenship, their occupation, their place of employment, their nearest relative, their signature. You notice on this part, it doesn't ask where they were born, which is frustrating, or where their father was born. So they kind of pick and choose different questions to ask on the different registrations. So depending on which time they registered, you get a little different detail. Then again, on the back half, we've got that physical description or any things that they might have going on with them that might disqualify them from service. And then again, down here is that date where we can see, yep, it was the third registration that he would have registered with. Any questions about these draft records before we move on?
How accurate do you think the birth dates are?
You know, they could have fudged their birth date a little bit. There's no guarantee, I guess. I would use this as a hint and say it could be a year or two off. Who knows? But look and see if you can find a birth record to prove or disprove that date.
So this would technically not be a primary source.
I mean, they're giving that information, but think about it. Did they have a reason to lie? Is he trying to avoid being drafted? Well, he's 43 at this point. Like he's really on the tail end of men getting drafted. So does he make himself a little older to really avoid it and say like, oh, I'm pretty old. You want all these young kids,
He's got health problems.
right? I've got health problems. I can't serve.
So he's in the short line.
Mhm. So, I mean, don't take everything on here as gospel. As with any other record, you're going to use that as a hint, follow up and find additional records to prove or disprove any of the little facts that you find in here. There was also a draft for World War II. This one is scanned in two different pages. So even though kind of the World War I also was 2 pages, they scanned them the 2 pages at once. Whereas the World War II, you have to kind of go to the next page to make sure you get both pages. Again, there were multiple registration dates for men aged 18 to 44. More than 50 million men registered, so hopefully good chance that you have some ancestors in the registration. They did have a young men's draft and an old men's draft, depending on what their birth date was. Unfortunately, if they lived in certain states, some of those cards were destroyed. So I've got a listing here for you: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Maine, Mississippi, New Mexico, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. All the old men ones were destroyed for some reason. The young men's, only Maine, for whatever reason, was destroyed. So if you have Maine ancestors, sorry. I believe they were intentionally destroyed. I'm not quite sure why, but great question. I also wanted to note that on Ancestry and on Ancestry Library Edition, they have 2 separate collections depending on if they registered with the Young Men's Draft or the Old Men's Draft. So they've got, this is the Young Men's, that was from 1940 to 1947 that they did those drafts, and then 1942 was that Old Men's Draft. Family Search does it a little bit different. They break each collection down by state, except for that fourth registration, which was the Old Men's Draft as a whole US-wide collection. So, for example, you'd see Montana World War II draft registrations for those young men, and it would give the dates. Not every state is on Family Search either. So I noticed Wisconsin, for example, is not, but they are included in that 1942 Old Men's Draft, which is that whole United States wide collection. So they do have the Wisconsin ones on Ancestry, though, for the Young Men's Draft. So if you don't find it on Family Search, also check Ancestry. And also be aware, sometimes if they lived kind of around the border, sometimes that local draft board office was located in a neighboring state, and it was easier for them to go to that neighboring state and register. So they might have lived in one state, but actually registered in a different state. So if you aren't finding them where you think they should be, and they're kind of located towards the border of the state, definitely check that other state and see if you can find them there. I also encourage you to read some of the collection notes. So you'll see this collection, all of World War II draft registration cards or whatever your collection is. Before you do the big search here, if you scroll down here, it tells you where they've got the information from, and then it tells you a little bit more about, kind of the details that you'll find on this card. And then this one for Ancestry, it tells you all the different cards that are in here. So you'll notice some of those states that I had mentioned just a few minutes ago that are not included in here. So that's another really great way for you to know, hey, if I've got an Alabama ancestor, they're not going to be in here. I shouldn't even bother searching for them in this one. You can also do the same thing at Family Search. So every collection has a little description that's kind of just like one sentence, but usually they have this how to use this collection when you see that on every collection page. And it brings you out to a separate little part of the Family Search wiki that tells you, okay, this is what you're going to find in that collection. Here's possibly some related collections, a little bit more about the different dates, what those records can tell you. Gives you a sample, how do you search it, kind of giving you more information on how to use this collection. What do you do if you found the person? What if you do if you don't find the person you're looking for? And giving you different little links to help if you need a little additional help. So I always encourage people to check those out before they do the search on their ancestor. So I'll show you examples of both of the World War II draft cards. This first one is the Young Men's. Again, just like the World War I, they will vary a little slightly in appearance depending on when they registered. So this one, again, is 2 pages. So you're going to want to make sure to get both pages. So this right here is just the first part of the card. But very similar to those World War I that we looked at, you're going to get their name, their address, age, birth date, telephone number if they have a telephone. This does thankfully ask for a place of birth. Sometimes they're very specific, sometimes they're not. Person who will always know your address. Hopefully that's somebody that they know. Thankfully there's a spot for the relationship so you can tell, oh, that's the wife, it's the brother, it's the mom. You've also got an address for that person, an employer's name and place of employment. They also sign it, which is great. And then again, that second page, you got to go click on it to get on the second page. And then you've got that physical description of what that ancestor looks like. Again, any physical things that might aid in identification or might disqualify them from having to serve. And then they've just kind of got that local board kind of information on here on the bottom part. So very similar information to the World War I draft cards. Again, 2 pages. And then we've got the Old Men's cards. So there is a little bit of overlap from World War I and World War II registration dates. So if you have an ancestor that was born from 1877 to 1900, you're likely going to find them in World War I draft as well as World War II draft. So definitely make sure to look for those ancestors in both if they kind of fall in that time period.
Be the purpose of having 2 different, young men and old men.
Because when they first started drafting, they wanted the younger men, and they thought, oh, we can fill all the quotas that we need and get all the soldiers we need with all these young men. And then they realized, oh man, we still need more people. So
Second round because they
we're
needed more.
we're gonna need a second round, and we're gonna have to expand the ages because we need more men. Mhm. Uh,
Even so, they registered during the World War One draft, they had to re-register for World War Two?
yep, for the old men would have had to. Yep. So John Kepschel, one of my ancestors, we looked at his World War One draft card just a few minutes ago. So here he is in World War Two, having to be registered again because his birthday falls between April 28th, 1877, and is before February 16th of 1897. Poor John is just barely at the tail end because January 22nd, 1897 was his birthday. So he just barely was considered to have to be drafted. But just like the young men, they have, again, those same kind of detailed information, name, residence, telephone, age, birth date, birth location, a person who's going to always know your address. Unfortunately, this one does not ask who in the world that person is. So you're going to have to do a little, digging if you don't recognize that name. Thankfully, it's Mrs. John Kepschel. I know that that's the wife. We've also got an employer address, signature of him as well. And again, click on the second page to get the rest of that, to get that physical description. Same little spot where they can add any physical characteristics and that local board information down here. Any questions about those World War II drafts? All right. Korean War, they are just starting to digitize those draft records within the past year or so, so not a ton are online yet. They're continually adding more and more states, so they're kind of doing them state by state. They have an index on Ancestry for the states that they've done, but no images yet. Fold 3 is really the spot where you're going to want to go for the Korean draft cards. They've only got about 33% of the collection complete, though, as of this morning when I checked again. So men would have had to submit to the Selective Service System between 1948 and 1959 during this time period, and the young men were required to submit that draft card if they became eligible for military service between age 18 to 26. These cards are also 2 pages, so again, be sure to get both. And again, I encourage you to look at that collection description, especially on Fold 3, because it is going to tell you specifically what states are covered. So I'll show you how to get there. If you didn't see that, when you kind of first come on Fold 3, they've kind of got it broken down by the different wars. So of course, I'm going to click on Korean War if I'm looking for those Korean War draft records. If I go under publications, that's going to give me all the different collections they have specifically on here, and I can start typing. So I can start typing draft if I know I'm specifically looking for the draft cards. It pops up right here. I can click on it. Right here is kind of where you see how complete it is. And then when you click on here, it's first going to give you an overview. So if you click on continue, that's going to give you the list of states that they have currently in this collection. So you'll notice Wisconsin's not in here, Illinois is not in here, Ohio. I mean, all kinds of states are not in here. They've only got, maybe half. I don't even know how many they've got in here, but quite a few states are missing yet. So if your ancestor is not in this state, don't bother searching the Korean records yet. Check back maybe in a few months. They'll have some more states done, hopefully. Here's an example of one that I pulled. It's just a random person from South Carolina. So again, similar to the other drafts, we've got their name. This one at least gives you a selective service number, which you could use to then order some of their selective service stuff. Address, date of birth, place of residence and mailing address could be different for this person. Maybe they're living somewhere and getting their mail somewhere else. Name of person who's going to know their address. Thankfully, this one, even though there's not a spot that says who it is, they put in parentheses who that person is, what their occupation is, who they're employed with, where that place of employment is. And then back here, it's talking about any active duty in the armed forces since 1940. So they can list if they were part of World War II or anything like that, or if they have any present membership in any reserve component. We've got a signature there. We've got that physical description. And then, this is just kind of the draft board saying, yep, I witnessed this person filling this in and witnessed their signature. So they're who they say they are. And again, if you do look these up on Ancestry, this is what you get on Ancestry. You do get some detailed information on Ancestry, but you're not going to get the actual image. To get the actual image of those cards, you need to go to Fold 3 at this point because, as it says on Ancestry in their collection description, until the processing of all of the records is complete, the images are only going to be available on Fold 3. After it's all complete, then Ancestry also gets a copy of those images. Vietnam War, of course, those are not online yet. Probably won't be for a while. Of course, not enough time has passed, and they're obviously working on those Korean War ones first, so it'll be a little bit of time. If you do have an ancestor who served or who drafted in the Vietnam War, follow up with those selective service records. I've got that link in your handout. So if you have any men that were born before 1960 that would have had to register with selective service, you can see if you can get their record through the National Archives. Of course, if your ancestor did end up serving, remember, even if they were drafted, doesn't mean that they for sure served. But if they did for sure serve, you might be able to find some service records that's going to give you some more details on what their experience was. So we're going to have records created before, during, and after their service. I'm going to list a couple and talk about a couple and show a couple examples, but this is not all-inclusive by any means. Of course, a big collection is enlistment records. So when they signed up, it's going to have their name, their rank, their regiment, their company, a physical description of them, any kind of enlistment details, like what date they registered for service and where they would have enlisted. So there's things like if you're looking for World War II, they have an Army enlistment record collection on Fold 3 and on Ancestry, though the indexed information is going to vary slightly depending on which site you go to. So I would look at them both because you're getting slightly different details on both. So here's an example of the same guy. On the left-hand side, we've got the record from Fold 3 that gives you kind of those basic details, his name, enlistment place, what branch, residence, what his term was, level of education, occupation, marital status, birth date, place, stuff like that. And then on the right-hand side, we're getting a little slightly different information or in a slightly different order. So we're still getting some of those details, but this, like, for example, lists his education on this side. It didn't say, oh, it said grammar school over here, but this side it says 4 years of high school. So slightly different wording on some of these, slightly different details on some of these. So again, I always make sure to look at both of them. There is no actual image associated with these collections at this time, so we're just unfortunately relying on the index right now. There are some collections that do have cards like these. So this is an example of one from New York that was for a World War II man who enlisted. So they have a whole collection on Ancestry and on Ancestry Library Edition, where again, they're getting some of those details, name, place of birth, date of birth, address, when they enlisted, all that kind of stuff, any past service that they would have had, things like that. Also, something that's really important is called an official military personnel file, or OMPF. So many of the veterans from World War I to the more current wars would have had these files. It's basically an administrative kind of file that contains all kinds of information about their service. So it's going to have possibly their enlistment documents, information on what units they were assigned to, any training they would have had to do, or any special qualifications they had, how their performance was, if they were given any awards or any decorations, if they were promoted in any way. might have their discharge papers from when they separated from service, that emergency contact information of who their next of kin is, things like that. Um, it has lots of great information, but it's not going to include any information that's specific about what battles they would have participated in if they were active duty and had to serve overseas, for example. The good news about these OMPFs is after 62 years from the time that they discharge, they are considered archival and thus open to the public. So that means anybody can request them, even if you aren't related or you aren't next of kin. It's continually a rolling date. So if your veteran was discharged on or before today's date, May 19th in 1964, that means you can go to the National Personnel Records Center and get a copy of it or request a copy of it. If it's, May 26th of 1966, that was their date of discharge, you'd have to wait a little bit of time, or you have to be the veteran or their next of kin in order to request those non-archival ones.
And I assume that if my father is an example of, I'm sure many servicemen who were awarded medals like later in life. My dad was in his 70s and he got like 3 of them.
Mhm.
So then if a congressman did it, then the congressman would be responsible for putting that would all go into a service record.
It should be in a service record.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Any medals that he would have received. Yep. But if you are looking for those non-archival ones that it's been less than 62 years, they have very specific definition of who next of kin is. It's usually a child or a spouse only through the National Archives. So like me, if I'm a grandchild and I'm trying to get that record, thankfully, hopefully 62 years have passed. If not, got to see if I can find a next of kin to request those records.
These are not the Army records that were destroyed.
I'm getting there.
Oh,
You're
okay.
you're jumping my gun. It's okay. But you can request any of these records through the National Archives. They've got a whole website where you can fill in a request right there. They've also got a form that you can print off, mail in, or fax in if you'd rather do it that way. But as we just alluded to, there was unfortunately a fire in 1973 at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. This is where a lot of those post-1917 records live. So this fire unfortunately destroyed or damaged an estimated 16 to 18 million records, including these OMPFs. So about 80% of the Army files from the people that were discharged between November 1st of 1912 and January 1st of 1960 were affected, as well as 75% of the Air Force files for those discharged between September 25th of 1947 to January 1st of 1964, but only names alphabetically from James E. Hubbard to the end of the alphabet were affected. Thankfully, if you have an ancestor who served with the Navy, the Marines, or the Coast Guards, those records were not affected by the fire. So if you have this assumption like, oh, they don't have the record, it burned up, and it's a Navy veteran or a Coast Guard veteran, it did not burn up. They still have those records, thankfully. Even if the record did get lost to fire, they have been trying to reconstruct those records through other record sets that were not affected by the fire. It's still an ongoing effort, though. So, when you reach out to the National Archives or the National Personnel Records Center to request one of these files that maybe was destroyed, they might only be able to give you part to kind of reconstruct it, or it might take some time before they're able to pull some things together, or you might need to do a little bit more digging in order to get more pieces of the puzzle. And I've got a link in the handout that you can learn a little bit more about those efforts and how to request those. The files are going to vary in length, depending on their service. So I just have a little part of a snapshot of my grandpa's file. It's 78 pages. He served during the Korean wartime period. So I've got lots of great details, a lot of great genealogical rich stuff on his service and all kinds of things he did. In comparison, my great-grandpa, his father, his OMPF is 219 pages, so a lot longer. He had the distinction of serving right after World War I with the Navy, and then again serving in World War II with the Navy. So, thankfully, both my grandpa and great grandpa were in the Navy, so their files were not affected by the fire. So I'm very fortunate to have gotten their records and have all these great details. And all I had to do was request it from the National Personnel Records Center. I didn't even have to go to St. Louis to go get it. So.
What kind of a fee
Actually, it was completely free. So I've heard mixed stories. Sometimes they charge, sometimes they don't charge. So
did you get on one?
it depends on who you get. Yeah. But I've heard those people who do get charged, it's really not that bad. Sometimes they only charge you for the cost of copies, which might be a couple bucks, depending on how long the file is. Even if your ancestors served during peacetime, like my other grandpa, he served in, the 50s, I believe, kind of after that Korean War kind of time period. Um, he has an OMPM. So he served with the Army. Thankfully, his was not affected by the fire. But this is kind of the note that I got from the National Archives that says, okay, these are the kinds of details that is in this package if your ancestor would have gotten, things like disciplinary actions or an enlistment contract or foreign or sea service or military schooling and training. So these are kind of some of the details, even dental exams, that they would have in this file. So again, lots of kind of fun things that you're going to see in these files. So definitely worth the effort to reach out and get a copy of these.
Did you block out?
I blocked out those just because he's still living. Yeah. We also had a really great talk from a genealogist, Tina Beard. She talked all about the National Personnel Records Center, all the different records that they have available, and how, if you want to go there on site and research, how you would go about doing that. We've still got a recording of that on our YouTube channel if you'd like to go back and watch it. It's still there. youtube.com/APLREF is our YouTube channel. And if you weren't aware, the National Personnel Records Center also houses civilian and government employment records. So if your ancestor was a postmaster, for example, or worked with the government in some sort of way, that they were employed by the government, they are going to have records there at that National Personnel Records Center. So well worth a shot to look into what they have there and get copies of those records. The next kind of service record is called a morning report. So this is a daily report that a unit would have given, basically a report of what's going on. So what their supply and personnel strength is, who's transferring in and out, any injuries, any casualties, any other change in condition of who's a part of that unit. So the Army units, as well as some early Air Force units, had these beginning in World War I. It's especially helpful if that OMPF was one of those that was lost in the fire. You can kind of use these morning reports to kind of reconstruct a little bit of what's happening. They do have a great collection of morning reports from 1912 to 1939 on Fold 3 right now. And then additional records outside of that time period are going to be available through the National Archives. So I'll show you an example of a morning report. At first, when you click on it, you're kind of like, oh, this looks really boring. Of course, it's going to tell you that company, infantry, whatever month it is. When you click on the next page, that's when you start getting kind of the meat of the stuff. So first, you're going to get some kind of statistical information, who's present, who's a corporal, who's a sergeant, who's sick, but you're not getting details. You want to see names, right? Well, if you scroll on over here, they've got remarks. Now, depending on who filled in the remarks is how detailed it's going to be. Sometimes they're listing names and locations and time. So-and-so was put, in the hospital, or so-and-so transferred over here. Sometimes you just get the surname. So you just kind of need to know, hey, it's Lieutenant Williams that I'm looking for, and then kind of pick out that name in the handwriting, which sometimes is really easy to read and sometimes not easy to read.
Who in the world is able to keep track of all this stuff I'm thinking of my dad's in the Battle of the Bulge. Who keeps track of these daily details?
There would be somebody who was in charge of all of these, yeah. So I'm not sure if they would have received reports from everybody in the unit or just kind of those in the higher up ranks in the unit that would have reported to one person and gotten those. I honestly don't know how they were all compiled, but
Oh,
yeah,
massive job.
yeah, definitely massive, especially in the midst of war. But these sometimes go on for multiple pages. So, keep clicking through, keep clicking through. Some of them might only be a few pages, some of them might be multiple pages. Sometimes you're going to get lots of really great detail. Sometimes, you might have to go through a few pages before you see your ancestor's name. So, it's a little tedious, but once you find it, you get a little detail. It's better than being told, "Hey, that file burned in the fire. I can't tell you anything." So you can at least learn a little bit more through the morning reports. There's also something called muster rolls. So these record attendance or the status of an individual within a company, within a regiment, special detachment, or a unit. They basically use these to say, hey, he was here, he gets paid, or he was sick. So the Navy would have done these quarterly, depending on who was on the vessel or the station that they were at. For the other branches, they sometimes did them monthly or bi-monthly. Really depends on time period and that branch of service. But they've got a couple of collections online. So Ancestry Library Edition has one for the Marine Corps. They've also got some Navy muster rolls and more specifically a World War II Navy muster roll collection on Ancestry Library Edition. Here's an example of one of those World War II Navy muster rolls. And if you're thinking of ordering that official military personnel file, this is an easy way. Just searching quick on Ancestry Library Edition to find this to get their service number because it's really helpful if you have that service number when you're requesting that person's file that you put that service number in there and then they know exactly who, what John Smith you're talking about and not need to look through all the John Smiths to figure out if it's the right one or not. So you can see just putting in my great grandpa's name, I've got, 32 different results of muster rolls for him. So I can kind of track what he's doing in World War II. So of course his name's going to be on here with a couple other different people. You have to kind of look and see, here's the service number, here's what his rank is, here's, the date, and he's at a naval receiving station in Chicago. So this is probably towards the beginning of his service. You're going to kind of want to make note of what number it is because down here, that corresponding number also gives you additional details down here. So again, these kind of just tell you he's here or, hey, he's being transferred here, he's discharged, or kind of what's going on, what their status is at that time. Lots of other additional service records, of course, discharge records, if they were a prisoner of war at any time. If they have passed on, they might have had a special military headstone. They would have had to apply for that. Of course, the family would have. There's something called a Burrell's death file as well, which I'll show you in just a minute what that means. Of course, if they lost their life during service, there's also going to be different records through the American Battle Monuments Commission. If they were buried at a national cemetery, there's going to be records for those. So all kinds of different things. Even if they didn't die in service, look at those burial records. They might have details on their service, whether it be on their headstone or within that cemetery record. It might talk about, what unit they would have served in, or you can kind of confirm, oh yeah, it was during World War I that he served. Now I've got a little bit more detail. Now I can follow up and see, a little more detail on his service, see if I can find that service number and get some of these records that we talked about. Again, so many more different records that are available. Again, depends on the war, when they served, what their specific situation was, if they were in some of these records or any of the other records. So I'll show you a bunch of different examples now. This is a World War I service record that I got for my second great grandfather from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So if you weren't here on May 9th when Russ Horton was here with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, he talked all about the great resources they have there. They've got a World War I roster. So if your ancestor would have served from a Wisconsin unit during World War I, you can type in their name and there's a button that says request more information. then Russ will send you this. So this is his service record that tells me what his serial number is. Again, really helpful when I'm trying to find additional documents. I've got a physical description, where he was born, what organization he was a part of during the war, what his occupation was, marital status, when he enlisted, when he discharged, any other additional information. And sometimes they've got all these fun little abbreviations that even when you ask somebody who knows a little something, they're kind of like, well, this could mean this could mean that, and you have to kind of try to decipher some of the lingo a little bit. So sometimes it's a little more clear, sometimes it's not very clear of what it is. This is another example of a record that I got from the Veterans Museum, again, through requesting just through the site. I didn't have to go to Madison to grab it. Again, I've got a service number and some of those details. So this is talking about some of the transfers that he would have had, where he was born, when he was born. If you can see if they had any overseas service. My ancestor did not. When he was discharged, any engagements that they were a part of, so some of those battles and things like that, or any change in rank, things like that, you're going to get those details. There's also some World War II separation paperwork. So this is one for my great-grandfather that served in the Navy. So all the veterans who served after 1950 would have got this separation paperwork. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as a DD-214. Unfortunately, be aware that sometimes there are state statutes which may prevent you from getting a copy of this if you are not next of kin. So Wisconsin is one example. So technically in Wisconsin, only the veteran, or if the veteran is deceased, their spouse or children can request. I am not a spouse or a child of my great-grandfather, but I was able to obtain a copy because I asked at the local level, at the Brown County Veterans Service Office. My great-grandpa happened to have submitted a copy to them because he was living in the Green Bay area. So I was able to get a copy without being that official next of kin, which is really great for me because my great-grandpa only had a spouse and one child, and they were both deceased by the time I requested this record. So I possibly could not have gotten access to this if I wouldn't have just tried locally. So that was one tip that Russ Horton from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum had given us, that try at the local level. Sometimes they're a little more lax, especially if the veteran is deceased, that you don't have to be that exact spouse or child. You can be a little further down that next of kin chain. So, of course, Google search to see what the local Veterans Services Office is where they're living. You're also going to get a lot faster of a response usually locally. But unfortunately, not all the veterans were filing copies locally. They weren't required to. But this is another great alternative if some of the things were lost in fire, that possibly locally they had a copy.
Do they have these separation, is it called the discharge paper? Because for veterans prior to 50? Like
Prior to
World
50, they
War
would have
II?
had something similar, but not this same DD-214.
My dad has them.
Yeah,
My
this
dad-
is a World War II era one. So even though he served in the 1940s, he still has one. So but it wasn't necessarily always required before 1950.
Okay, because I think I have one from my dad too.
They had to be processed, like my dad came from Europe and he had to go through, I don't know if it was New York or Chicago to be processed.
Yeah, so they might have kind of different levels depending on the branch of service and what time period they would have served with. But usually they had some sort of separation paperwork. Sometimes you're able to get it through family files if they would have saved it, or possibly locally. You could also check with the State Department of Veterans Affairs, or of course the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis as well. So again, similar information to some of the other records we looked at, name, address, when they would have served, what type of discharge they would have had, how long they would have served, what their title was, what unit they would have served with, employment prior to service, kind of different little pieces of detail that you can get on those ancestors. Here's another example of a World War II discharge report. So again, it looks slightly different. I just happen to thankfully have inherited this from my great grandma who had saved this. So again, you're getting some of these great details, and it's talking about, oh, he was given a victory medal, and oh, here's when he was immunized against smallpox, or just, random little details that you can find. Again, other little great genealogical things like their date of birth, place of birth, physical description, where they kind of enlisted and where they separated from, what their rank was, all that kind of great stuff. I've got another piece that I inherited again, it's called a separation qualification record. So again, I've got his Army serial number right on there. Now I can follow up and try to find additional records that weren't passed down through my family to see what else I can learn about his service. Fortunately for him, he was only in for a couple months, and it kind of basically tells me what he did. He was driving a truck. Earlier, I had mentioned headstone applications. So usually after they are deceased, somebody is filing to have a special military headstone. So this is, again, another spot where you can get that service number, some enlistment and discharge information, what branch of service, company, regiment, division they were a part of, date of birth, date of death, what kind of marker that they would have had, who applied for it. So hopefully that's somebody that you know and recognize because it's not giving a relationship. Oh, it does right here. Widow, of course. So this is a great collection. It's on ancestry.com. I think Family Search might also have a collection on headstone applications. There might be some overlap. It might be different stuff. Earlier, I'd also mentioned the Burles death file. So this is a screenshot from Ancestry Library Edition. We're not getting an actual image, but Burles stands for Beneficiary Identification Records Locator Subsystem, whatever that means. All I know is that it's for veterans. So you can see the name, birth date, death date, a social security number, what branch of service he would have served in, enlistment and discharge date. So again, it's giving me a little piece of the puzzle that I can now follow up on, see what else I can get on this veteran. Something else that has come just in the last few years is this website called the Burles Database. So this is a project from Reclaim the Records, which is this great organization that really tries to advocate on behalf of us genealogists and historians to try to get access to records that they believe we should have access to, including these Burles databases. So it's talking you through a little bit more about what Burles is and all that kinds of stuff. And you can even search on this website to see if your ancestor is included in here. And you can sometimes get things like their enlistment record or a dental record or disability records. They've got all kinds of little examples of some of the records that people have received through filing a Freedom of Information Act to get access to their ancestors' military records. Unfortunately, you can apply through this website, which makes it really simple and easy. But as you see on the updates, the federal government has been being difficult with it because, of course, lots of genealogists have flooded them with Freedom of Information Act requests. So what they've been giving us genealogists is this very basic, like, hey, you get the name, the date that they were married, possibly a mother and father's name, or if they were divorced, just like little pieces of detail and not actual copies of the record, which is not in line with Freedom of Information Act. So of course, Reclaim the Records is continually trying to fight legally to get us access and get the federal government to comply with giving us all those cool records like they showed on the front page of the site. So it's giving you some kind of language and follow-up steps that you can do and telling you this is why it's not legal for them to do that and all this kind of things that you can appeal, especially if you're next of kin, things like that. So definitely encourage you to look more into this if your ancestor is featured in the Burles database. And again, on this website, you can search free in the Burles database. So you just put in that name. So I'll just pop in a surname just to show you. So you can see all these people that are listed here. So if I see somebody that I want to, request their record, I can click on this little information, see possibly some details that they might have, and then it's saying, okay, submit a request for this person. And then you have to fill in some of the information and go through the process. The federal government will take a really, really, really long time before they send you that random piece of paper that gives you the very basic information. You can appeal. So far, I have appealed and have not gotten a record yet, but I know the government has been shut down at various times too since I've appealed, so we'll see what happens, but so far still waiting on further details. But hopefully eventually we will get some of those cool things once the federal government complies. Other things that you can look into are unit histories. So those can provide lots of really great details. Once you have that unit name or number, you can figure out what training they would have done, what campaigns or battles they were a part of, the different casualties that they were a part of. Last week, we had a really great talk through the Appleton Historical Society all about the 32nd Division, which is the Red Arrow Division. A lot of Appleton men would have served with this unit. So just on Wikipedia, there's this whole great entry all about this 32nd Division that was part of the Army National Guard, featuring men from Wisconsin and Michigan primarily, and talking through all these little details depending on if they served during World War I or World War II. So getting all these great details that I can learn more. Of course, they're citing their sources too that I can follow up and read those sources for even more details. So lots of really great things that you can find on some of these units. Sometimes the units even have their own websites where they have a little unit history, or Fold 3 also has some really great resources, or sometimes there's really great resources locally. Maybe they have some sort of unit history locally, or looking at the newspapers that that unit was based out of, or websites or books that would have been published about that unit can provide lots of really great detail. Any questions before I go through how to find some of these records and show you a little more on Ancestry Library Edition, Fold 3, Family Search?
Would they have information on any of the service members, not just those that served like overseas, if they stayed home and were in Alabama or
Yep. So
something?
the World War I and World War II veterans that I showed you, most of them did not serve overseas. So I got that information even if they didn't serve overseas, even if they weren't part of those battles. Yeah, great question. Let's see. Someone says, I loved seeing my mom's handwriting and my dad's signature on my dad's World War II registration card. Precious. So yeah, it's really cool to see those. And someone said the physical cards for those drafts were destroyed. The old men cards were done to collect the skills and labor available for older men for the home front, not for service. So. And someone, yeah, said they had trouble getting the Burroughs documents on the Freedom of Information request, so they went to their local congressman, and his office got the documents. So there's another workaround for you, possibly. Put our Congress people to work. All right, now we're going to dive in where you get these. So thankfully for us genealogists, some of these records might be online, might be easily accessible on some of these main websites that I'm going to talk about. Unfortunately, the vast majority of World War I and more current are going to be offline. Of course, there is a little subset online that you can start the search, but a lot of the stuff's going to be offline. Like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's really helpful when you're requesting additional records if you have their service number and or their social security number. At various times they would have, possibly only used their social security number before they assigned service numbers. And again, fairly easy to find those online through some of the things that I've showed you with just a little searching in some of the indexes that they have online where just in a few minutes you can find a service number usually or a social security number. So the main four websites that I would start with for these World War I and more current wars are going to be Ancestry, of course, both the paid edition if you have a subscription, or again, we have the free library edition that you can use in the library. Or if you don't live near Appleton, check with your local library for you virtual folks. We also have access to Fold 3 Library Edition with an Appleton Public Library card. or again, check with your local library. So here in Appleton, your card does have to be tied to Appleton. It can't be tied to Little Chute or Kimberly or Kaukauna or any of the other branches. It's just like an administrative thing that we can change your library to Appleton if you want to stop at the desk or give us a call. Because Appleton specifically pays for this database, Kimberly, Kaukauna, Little Chute, they don't contribute to it. So we want to provide access to the Appleton members only and not all the members of InfoSoup libraries. Family Search is a great website completely for free. You do need to have a free account and be signed into that free account to view records. Sometimes you run across some restricted records that you can't access from home that you could possibly view here at the library because we are an affiliate library. Or you could check with other affiliate libraries if you don't live locally, or they also have something called a Family Search Center, which are in existing churches kind of all throughout the world. And I'll show you in a second how to search for those as well. The National Archives also has a great site where you can search for free. Again, it may cost some money to request some offline records, kind of depends. Sometimes you get lucky and you get somebody who doesn't charge you, and sometimes you get unlucky and you get charged a little bit. Or if you have to mail in a request, there's a certain fee attached with certain things, depending on what you're requesting. So I'll show you some quick demonstrations on how to use these. So to get to Ancestry Library Edition, you're going to start at our website, apl.org. If you hover over this research and learn part, we have a little genealogy and local history section where it kind of brings together all those genealogy and local history resources. It's sorted alphabetically, so Ancestry Library Edition, of course, is the top spot. If you're kind of a new user to Ancestry Library Edition, I've got a user guide, I've got a video tutorial here that you can watch to learn a little bit more in depth, other than this quick little tutorial that I'm given here. If you click on it, it'll bring up that Ancestry Library Edition. Of course, there's multiple different ways to search for all the things. So you can see right here, they have a little military call out. So if you know specifically you're looking for military stuff, you can click Search Now. Even if you scroll down a little further, they also have the same little military call out. It all goes to the same spot. So no matter which one you happen across. There's also another call out under here, under search and military. All three of those military ones go to the exact same spot. So no matter where you click on, that's how you get there. And it will bring you to this part where it kind of narrows down once it loads here. It narrows down, so now you're only going to look in military records. You're not going to get census records or birth, marriage, death records or newspaper records. It's just looking at these military things. They even have kind of further subcategories. Like if you know, I only want to look at the draft records right now, I can click on draft and start narrowing it down. They've also got some collections that they have featured here that you can, if you know I want to specifically look for a World War II draft registration card, I can just click on that and search right there. If I want to see what they have on everything in the military on this person, I can just start popping in that name of that ancestor. If you have any kind of details like where they were born or when they were born, things like that, you can pop in here, or you can just start with the name. Click search, depending on how common your ancestor's name is, and you can see some of the results. So, right here, I've got that World War II draft registration card. I've got some of those Navy muster rolls that we looked at earlier. So anytime you see this little view next to a little kind of icon, that's like a little picture, that means you have an actual image you can look at. So if I click on it, it brings me right into this draft registration card that I can now, read through. Up here in the top corner, I can click save and save it to my computer. So now I have an image of it that I can save to my computer. Again, this one is 2 pages. You want to make sure you're getting both those pages and saving both those pages. I can go back to the results list and keep going through one by one and seeing all this great stuff that they have here. Also over here on the side, I can even narrow it down by those subcategories as well. So that's one way that you can search for military records. Another way I like to search is through the card catalog. So if you click on search and go to card catalog, which is the last option, this is also where you can kind of either use the filters over here or search by a specific title or a specific keyword. So for example, if I'm searching for draft records, I can pop in draft in the title, click search, and it's going to narrow it down to just collections that feature that word in it. So if I'm like, oh, I really want to find those Korean War draft records or those Civil War draft records or World War I, this is an easy way for me to get there. So again, I can kind of click on that and then do my search in that. So it's only going to show me World War I draft cards in here. Again, each of these collections have a little kind of source information, a little description on what kind of information you might find on here, what kind of records might be included and excluded depending on what states, things like that. But again, you just do a little name search here, click on search, and now it's going to pull up the results. Again, if you see that little icon, that means you have the image. You can click on the image and be brought right into that image. So pretty simple to find some of that stuff there. Any questions about Ancestry Library Edition and how to search for some of those military records they have in there? All right. Next up, we've got Fold 3. So Fold 3 is also owned by the same people that own Ancestry, but Fold 3 is very specifically for military records. They do have some non-military stuff in here, but of course their main focus is military records. Again, you would go to the APL website, go to that genealogy and local history area. This one you can use from home, which is really great. If you don't want to come into the library, you can come here. Again, I've got a little video tutorial, some little links that you can click on, but just to get into that database, you can click there. At this point, when you're from home, it's going to ask for your library card number. That's when you need to enter that library card number, so have that ready. So again, just like Ancestry, there's multiple different ways you can search. Just right away, I can type in my ancestor's name. I like to type it in with quotation marks so it knows to search that specific name together and not every instance of John and every instance of Kebschel. And it says, at first it said no results found, which was really weird, but now it thought for a second and loaded something. So now I can see things like the draft registration. They have consensus records on here. Here's another draft. Here's his morning report. So that's another way to kind of find their name within the morning reports without having to read them all. But I found that the indexing on the morning reports isn't always 100% accurate. So if you do know that unit that they would have served with, I would still encourage you to read through that time period that your ancestor would have been in there to find them in there. So again, just like the other sites, you'd click on that image, be brought right into that image. Sometimes they're one page, sometimes they're 2 pages. So again, here you can see it. If you click on actions, you can download it as well to your computer. Like I mentioned, though, there's lots of other different ways you can search. If you have that service number for your ancestor, you can also search by that. So, for example, 304-8399. Be aware, though, sometimes, for whatever reason, somebody else used that service number or it appeared on some record in World War I that was not associated with my great-grandpa. But this one, for example, is a Navy muster roll that would have had his service number on it. So again, I can click on it and be brought into that record. I can look through it, see all the great stuff. I can click action, click download. The other thing that I showed you a little earlier when we looked at those Korean ones, the Korean draft records, was they have all these different conflicts broken down by what war it was. So you can, again, go in that way as well. So if you know, hey, my ancestor served in World War II, I want to see what's available there and not have to wade through all the other things that might not be World War II related, I can click on that card. I can search for that name right in here. or like I showed you before, you can click on publications and then you can start searching things. So I can search draft and it'll pull up the draft cards. I can search a specific unit. Maybe I'm looking for the 34th bomb group. I can type that in and now I can see, oh, they've got a unit history on this bomb group. So I can browse through this or I can search through that. The thing about Fold 3 is it kind of works like a little accordion where you're kind of clicking and it's got like groups and subgroups and then subgroups. So sometimes you have to click a lot before you get into the actual records here. But once you're in it, you can kind of go page to page then and kind of see all the great things that they would have on this specific unit. The other thing I wanted to show you is, go back here. If we go into the draft records, let's see, old men's. So I could search right here for that ancestor's name, or sometimes they misspell some things. So maybe if you don't get a result by spelling it the right way, if you click on browse, they're going to break it down by state. So you can find that state that your ancestor would have served in. And then they've got all the different last names. Well, if you don't want to go through all these different last names, you can, type in that last name and it'll narrow it down. Click on it, and then again, I can narrow it down. So I can see, whoever I'm searching for and kind of easily get to it that way. And then be brought into that card, for example. All right. Any questions about Fold 3 and how to use it? If you also didn't notice too, before you search in here, that's where you can see the completeness of a different collection as well. So for example, it's 100% complete for this old man's draft registration cards for World War II. So sometimes your C collections are only 25% complete or 98% complete. So if you don't find your ancestor in there to try again later once they have it 100% complete, because maybe just by chance your ancestor is not quite in there yet.
Put in just a separate category for what they were drafted for, or were they put on the front lines, or just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like infantry, I would think would be easier on somebody who's younger.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they would have done that with the draft, and if any of those old men were actually drafted, if they would have had specific assignments that were different from the young men. I do not know that, unfortunately. Maybe something you could follow up and ask the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Russ is so knowledgeable about some of this stuff that he might be able to tell you just off the top of his head. If that's in Madison, but you can always give him a call or send him an email as well.
And there was a birth year cutoff too.
There was a birth year cutoff. Yep.
So if they were born in like 1880, they probably wouldn't have been on there, but they would have
Yeah.
been.
So like we noticed with my ancestor, he just barely made the cutoff because his birthday was in January and the cutoff was February. So
That's right.
Yeah, one, they said that they were picking vocations for those people just to do stateside assignments, like
yeah,
driving a truck or.
they might have, yeah. So it depends. Maybe on some of their skill sets, they were sent to do certain things. I mean, I don't know that they were necessarily right away, hey, you're sent to the front lines. I'm guessing it depends on the time period when they were drafted into service, if they were drafted into service, or of course, some of these men volunteered and said, hey, I'm not going to wait for myself to be drafted. I'm just going to go do my service. So,
Well, when my father was in, he was drafted in,
Mhm.
a little bit older, but drafted in. And then they asked for volunteers when he was in
yeah.
to serve where he served.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so they were always looking for volunteers and also having to sometimes draft people to each place had a different quota and different things that they would have had to meet. So sometimes, people were like, oh, we don't want to have to do a draft here. So let's, try to recruit as many volunteers as we can. And some places were a little more easy to do that than others.
And by place, you mean state possibly or?
States, and so each state had a quota, but then sometimes they broke it down by county as well.
They couldn't meet the quota.
That's a great question. I don't know.
I'm
I
wondering
don't
about that
know.
now. I mean, with all
Yeah.
the conflicts that we're in, what do they do?
I'm really not sure. Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
great question. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah.
They're not being drafted, but
Yeah. I think thankfully so far, yeah, we don't have to have a draft, but if we ever get to that point, I guess there have some kind of guidelines on what they need to do. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
Bigger than the
point.
world
Yeah.
map.
Mhm.
One of the east right now is all up in the air.
Yeah.
Their ships.
Mhm.
That
Well,
will support people.
yeah, with my father though, he was in the Merrill's Marauders. And they were all volunteers and they had no extraction uh plans at all. They expected all of them to just die.
Yeah. Wow.
where Merrill's Marauders?
Yeah, in China, Burma, and India. And we were fighting against the Japanese
Oh,
that
that
were
was in
there.
the Pacific. That's where your dad would have been.
Yeah, they were fighting against the Japanese and the China was helping and they took over some of the airfields that were there.
Merrill's Marauders.
Mhm. Oh,
What happened if they
it
had
was terrible.
expansion plan? How'd they get them out?
Oh, well, because they won,
Oh,
by taking over different airfields and they marched through the mountains and everything. It was bad. Not very many lived, put it that way.
All right. So now I'll show you a little bit about Family Search. So you can type in familysearch.org is the website. Because we're here at an affiliate library, it kind of shows you a little different homepage because it knows we're in an affiliate library right now. But from home, you would just click on sign in, or even when you're here at the library, click sign in to sign in with your account. Again, if you aren't having an account with Family Search, completely free to do so. Just like the other sites, multiple different ways to search. So one of the main ways is going search and clicking records. So what I can do is I can start typing in my ancestor's name, start typing in, any details like their birthplace, for example. Click on search. Of course, this is going to search the whole entire site and give me all things like census records and birth records and all that kind of stuff. If you really just want to narrow down to the military stuff, there's a little button up here that says collection. And then it's going to pop up something here on the right-hand side where you can scroll down and then click on the box that says all military collections. Or if you know specifically, like, oh, I really only want the World War II one or the Wisconsin one, you can just unclick that box and check the relevant box. But you would have to click that apply collection filter. Now it's going to narrow it down to just those records that are related to military. So just like the other sites, if you see a little icon with a camera, that means you have an image to look at. So we can go ahead and click on that to be brought into it. So this is something called the Veterans Affairs Master Index. So another way to kind of see what unit they would have served with, what their serial number is, when they were born, when they enlisted, when they discharged, when they died. These all mean something too. Don't ask me what they mean because I don't remember. But it's a way that you can use these numbers, and it tells you like there's a certain file type based on their record that you could then request from the National Archives. And that's the number for those different files. But again, you can save this if you want to. There's a little button right here that says download. It's got the little arrow with a little line underneath. So I can save a copy of it to my computer. Can go back and see all the other great things that they've got on him in here. So other, draft cards, enlistment records, all kinds of great things like that. If you don't see that camera icon, that means there's no associated image with it. So this one's just somebody else, but you can see if I click on it, I'm just getting a little indexed information. There's no image available. But this at least gives me some information like their serial number that I can then use that information to follow up and get some stuff offline for that person. Another way to search for people is if I go back to that search and go to that records, and if I bypass this part, I can come down to the find a collection part. So remember earlier I talked about finding the different draft records. I can type in draft, and you can see Family Search does it a little bit different, that they break it down by state first. So you would click on that state that you would want to search in, and then you could do that search for that person in here and be brought into those records that are just specifically that collection. Again, I encourage you to click on that how to use this collection. It'll tell you a little bit more about that collection. Maybe there's a certain county that's missing or a certain state that's missing in this collection. It'll tell you stuff like that, if there's anything like that, to know about that collection before you dive in. There's also things that are not indexed, specifically for military records as well as other record types. So if I click on search, I'm going to go to images. Here you're going to start with a place. So I could start with a specific state, for example. So like I can do Iowa. I could even do something more specific, like a specific county or a specific city, or I can narrow it down over here as well. Of course, it's giving me lots of different results at first, including non-military stuff. But if I scroll down here, there's a section that says life event, and there is one that says military service. So I can click on that. Again, you can check any boxes that you want or just leave all of the military ones checked. Click update, and then it's going to narrow it down so that I only have 24,000 records to go through, but you can see they've got military records. Again, I can narrow it down by date. I can narrow it down by a specific county here if I want to, and then see what's available. So here they've got some discharge indexes for, 1918 to 1919 that maybe my ancestor would be included in here. So I can click on it and then be brought into this collection. And then I'd go through and see, okay, is my ancestor's name in here? Sometimes it's kind of like you have to, click through a lot though, because it's not indexed. If I just search for my ancestor's name, these records are not going to pop up. I have to go page by page and look through them. Sometimes though, thankfully, they give you like a book and a page number so you can see if those records have been digitized and like see if I can find book 12, page 191, for example. If it's in here or if it's in one of the other collections that's not indexed. That might be a way that I can get those actual records then. Or they've got lots of other just various things, again, depending on what's in here. So that over here, sometimes they give a little bit more detail, like what volume they're on or what it is a little bit more. Sometimes they give some names or other details. So see, I've got some names over here for specific people. So I definitely encourage you to check out these unindexed collections as well. They've also got some digitized books that are, related to the wars, of course, and different rosters that they might have. So click on search and go to books. I've got to prove that I'm human. So this didn't work 2 weeks ago when we were working on it, when we were doing the pre-World War I. So let's see if it works today. So you can just type in like World War, for example, or you can type in a specific location. Of course, it's going to search all the different books that they have. They have like 500,000 books. So you can see the different results that would have this. So if I'm really curious to read about war brides of World War II, I could do that. Sometimes they have access restrictions. So this one says it's protected. I can only search within it. So I could search to see if my ancestor's name appears in it, but I couldn't be able to go page to page to see it all. If it says available online, that means I can click on it and view inside. View inside, come on. And now I've got this book that I can browse page by page if I want to. It doesn't look like it's got, oh, there we go. So we've got photos in here. That's kind of cool. You could also use this little magnifying glass and type in that ancestor name that you're looking for. Hopefully there's a Smith in here. There is. It's going to show you the results over here. I can click on it and be brought right to that page. So there's got to be, there's some images here of some of the soldiers. So that's another really cool thing that you can find online without having to go anywhere, or even get dressed if you don't want to. So yeah, that's another great thing about some of these genealogy websites.
Yep, easy to go down the rabbit hole.
Very easy to go down the rabbit hole. You can spend all afternoon. Yeah. Again, a reminder, we are an affiliate library. So if you see this little icon in any of the resources on Family Search that's kind of got this little like exclamation point, that means it's a restricted collection. If you click on that icon, it can tell you you can access it in an affiliate library. If it says that, you can come access it at the library and it would unrestrict those images. It might also say you can only access it at a Family Search Center, which that means you would not be able to access it here. We do have a Family Search Center in Appleton, or wherever you're living locally. Just click on this little pin, and then you can type in your city, your state, and it'll show you your nearest Family Search Affiliate Library or Family Search Center.
Where's it?
Where is the Family Search Center? Gosh, I haven't been there in a
Some of the north.
Yeah.
park something. Yeah. Let's go search it just real quick. So if we click on the pin,
It's only open
Park
like
Ridge,
one
maybe?
day a week, I think.
yeah, West Park Ridge. So 425. Yeah, they're only open Wednesdays. So Wednesdays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So they're very, very limited hours. They're all volunteer run. So it is part of usually an LDS affiliated church, because Family Search is affiliated with the LDS church.
They give instruction.
Yeah.
Kind of like, oh.
Yep. Yeah, so they're very helpful. They're very familiar with using the site and they can help sit with you and try to search for things. All the different centers are going to have different hours though. So like they've got one in Green Bay that has different hours. They've got one in Oshkosh that has different hours. If you want to find a different location, again, you can, sometimes it automatically kind of senses your location, or you can pop in here what your city and state is. Any of the green ones are those Family Search Centers. So I can see, oh, there's one in Manitowoc that's open right now. Or any of the orange ones are going to be affiliate libraries. So I can see the Menasha Library is also an affiliate, or hey, I'm going to be down in the Madison area. Let's see what's down there. So that's another way you can find other ones.
In Family Search, people that are alive, can they be searched? Or are they?
Depends on the collections. People that are alive for military records, there's probably not a whole lot on here for military
Just
records.
general, if someone has been added to a family tree. And
If they're in a family tree and they're alive, they're not supposed to be publicly shown.
Okay.
So if they are publicly on there, then that's a problem. And you can reach out to Family Search and say, I'm not dead. I shouldn't be on there. Or my mom's on here and she's not supposed to be.
You couldn't search for that person.
If they're as long as they're on there listed as still living, they should not be visible. No.
If you were a church member, you might be able to.
Yeah, and they do have certain collections. Like I know Ancestry has like a public records collection where you can search like, addresses and phone numbers and things like that. Or they've got, certain marriage records and stuff that people that are still living are included in those. It really depends on the specific state or record holder who owns those records and what access they allow. Some they put a restriction of 50 years, or some they have a restriction of 100 years. So every collection's different. All right, the National Archives is our fourth kind of genealogy site that I wanted to show you. So this is catalog.archives.gov, so it's a kind of a subsection of the archives. So again, you can just type in that person's name, you can type in a location, whatever you want to type in. Sometimes you get some really great stuff. Sometimes you get a lot of, census records or other kinds of things. You get photos, sometimes, digitized like records. So this first one is somebody who was a part of Regiment 2 in the Wisconsin Infantry in Company G. So this looks like kind of like a muster roll or some sort of index card for this person. You can zoom in over here on the side. Yeah, so this basically just tells me he was a part of the Spanish War, it looks like, and he was a private in this specific unit. So that might be kind of the information I need then to follow up and find some more stuff on him. The thing about this site is it's not always quite easy to save an image. So you can always do like a little screen grab or a screenshot of it sometimes, but they don't make it easy to save it like some of the other sites do. Um, Sometimes you can scroll down here and sometimes they might have a download button, or they might tell you, oh, it's a part of a different record, or you can follow up with a little bit more. But oh, here's the download button. Boom. So if they allow you to download it, they just hide it a little bit. You can download it there. Again, you can type in, a specific location, for example. And so sometimes you get just things that are completely not related. Like here's the 1950 census, for example, or here's something that's war history. So just experiment with what you're searching, what words you're popping in there. You can also use these filters on the side to try to narrow down to some more relevant results. There's another piece of the National Archives website that's the archival databases area where they also have some military specific stuff. So you can see right here they've got stuff on Civil War, World War II, Korean, Vietnam, Cold War. So again, you could pop in a name here, click search. They've got the different collections. So we've got some Army enlistment records, for example, that there's some results. If I click on view records, I've got, some information. Sometimes it's usually just an index. If there's more of an associated record with it, it'll give you some more details sometimes. But usually you don't find too many images on this part of the site, but at least gives you some things like, what unit they were a part of, possibly their Army service number, things like that, when they would have enlisted, great stuff like that. Again, you can also just pop in here and go in Korean War and see kind of what stuff. Like they've got military personnel who died, dead and wounded army casualties, and then go search within these specific collections if or prisoner of war, things like that they've got different collections that your ancestors might be a part of. Also, local resources, so newspapers, especially during wartime, tend to be very detailed. So they might have like printed a copy of a record, like or typed out the text of a record that they sent home talking about their service. There's going to be casualty reports or homecoming stories or when they enlisted or some parade that they had when they came home, things like that. There's different county archives, or check your local historical societies, local libraries, see what resources they would have, local museums, things like that. They might have some great stuff online, but the majority of it's going to be offline, likely. So definitely follow up with them. Always remember the acronym SLAM, Societies, Libraries, Archives, Museums. Those are the locations you want to search locally to see what's going to be available in that area. So societies, libraries, archives, museums. Again, some of the offline records you can order directly from the National Archives, either mailing a form to them. Sometimes you can request certain things through the website. You can go visit them either at Washington, D.C. if their stuff's in Washington, D.C., or at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. Or you can, of course, hire a researcher that would be local to that area. They've got lots of different researchers that are specific to those places, that they have, searched long and hard for lots of military records for people. They know exactly what they're doing and they can get it to you pretty quick. So for military records, there are kind of the two main ones are National Archives in Washington, D.C. and the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. The majority of that post-World War I stuff is at St. Louis, but there is a link in your handout that tells you more specifically. So it's broken down by branch. So say you're looking for somebody in the Navy, and then you're going to have to see, okay, they're discharged, deceased, or retired on or before 1903. That means it's in this place in Washington, D.C. If it's from this time period to that time period, it's at the NPRC, things like that. So you can kind of know based on what branch of service and time period, what place to go to or to find a researcher. They've also got a spot in here where you can find researchers. I might have had it in your handout, or it might be in the last one. I think you can also just type in researchers here. Yeah, services for researchers. So you can then see if you can find a researcher here. There's also a really great World War I genealogy book by Deborah Dudek. We've hosted her virtually to talk about World War I and a couple other great things. So you can go online, it's an ebook and download it. We do have a copy of an older version of it that hadn't been updated. This is an updated version, but it's completely free. She talks to you about some of the World War I specific resources and how to research those veterans. We also had Russ Horton from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum a couple years ago talking more specifically about World War II and more about those DD-214s and some of the resources they have at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum related to World War II. Again, that is on our YouTube channel. And then just on the 9th, we had him talking about all the different resources for Wisconsin veterans from the Civil War to the more current wars and what they can do to help you find those Wisconsin veterans. We're only going to have it up for about a month. So if you didn't catch it on the 9th, definitely go to our YouTube channel sometime in the next 2 weeks or so and take a view of that. That's what I've got for you. Our next section for the Genealogy Jumpstart is going to be Tuesday, June 23rd, all about planning a research trip because, of course, not everything is online. You're going to have to eventually go to an archive, go to a library, go to a museum, go to a Register of Deeds office, a courthouse. So come learn about what you need to do before you embark on that research trip. In the meantime, we've got our Find Your Ancestors session, which is also a genealogy series. We are switching to our summer time slot now that we're going to be in June. So those are the Thursdays at 6 p.m. So our next one will be Thursday, June 11th at 6 p.m., talking about unusual sources to find a child's father. So Mary Rousseau is going to walk us through a whole case file where she was really trying to determine this person's father, and she used some different sources that people don't automatically think, hey, I'm going to see if they have a parent listed on that resource. So she's going to talk about those different unusual resources and how to find them. And then I just wanted to shout out my veterans in my family. So these are some of the men in my family that we looked at their records. So my great-great-grandfather, John Kepschel, who served in World War I, my great-grandpa, Melvin, who served in World War II, and then my grandpa, who served in the Korean War. So thanks to all of our veterans. I'm happy to take any questions now. Y'all ready to go search for your military ancestors now? All right. Yeah, I try. Let's see if there's any online questions here. So someone says you would need to know the unit to find the morning reports. So like I showed earlier on fold 3, you can sometimes search the name and then find them in the morning report. So like we showed my grandpa Cupshall was in the morning reports, but I always encourage you once you have the unit to also go look at the unit and read through the morning reports during that time period because the indexing isn't always 100% accurate. What wars or years cover Burles? That's a great question. Burles is quite extensive, if I remember correctly. So, let's see. It's over 19.5 million deceased American veterans. Da, da, da. All about Burles. Here we go. Almost all U.S. veterans have or had a veterans benefits claim file. So late 19th, 20th, and 21st century are included in here. A lot of them are unfortunately still at the VA. Some of the very old ones are at the National Archives, like the Civil War files. But this, yeah, is quite extensive. So you can see, World War I, World War II, and beyond are included in here. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you. Or see you on June 23rd, or in the meantime at our Find Your Ancestor session on June 11th.
Thank you
So
very much.
thanks for attending.
Thanks.
Good luck finding those veterans. Hopefully you have some luck. Take care, everyone.